And for those joining us today who might not know, what is Encore.org and what does your organization do?
Okay. Hi, everyone. So Encore is a national nonprofit, and we bring older and younger people together to solve problems, bridge divides, and create a better future together. We've been around for about 20 years, and you may know us because we popularized the Encore stage of life and Encore career language. We realized that midlife was becoming this very long, extended period of time that didn't have a name. And we have been really focused on what we call second acts for the greater good, people using their vast time, talent, and experience to really help fix the world, both in volunteer work and in paid jobs.
And so how did you come to work at Encore.org? What led up to that?
So I'm kind of a serial career changer. I was a lawyer for the first 10 years of my career, really bad fit. I was reminded of that this week when I had to work on a contract, and I realized I kept putting it off, and I wanted to do every single thing else in my inbox but look at that agreement. So after about 9 years, I decided to make a career change, and I started taking classes in freelance writing and learning from a lot of younger people, actually, because that's who I was meeting in these classes that I kept going to. And I started pitching articles to various publications. And I realized when I started writing that I was getting a lot more satisfaction out of that than anything I had ever done as a lawyer. So I spent the next couple of years figuring out how to make that career change. And then really for the next decade, I worked as a journalist and a journalism educator and a public speaker. And all my work was focused on what really became my passion, which is the future of work and careers. So I wrote my first book in that period, which is about what I call the slash career. We all these days need many slashes, right, to define our many identities. And I wrote mostly for the New York Times, where I started a column and blog there called Shifting Careers, which really was about how the world of work is constantly changing, and we need to constantly shift to keep up with that. And it is through my work at the Times that I became aware of what Encore was doing. And at that time, Encore was really one of the only organizations that was looking at kind of the aging of America and what that demographic shift was going to mean, both in terms of work, but in terms of lots of other areas of life. And I got really fascinated by the work. I interviewed the founder, Mark Friedman, who's now my colleague. And I was just really, I realized that this is important work that I wanted to be a part of. So just as the world of journalism was shifting and I was realizing it was going to be very hard to stay in that game, I had this opportunity to move to Encore and really learn a new field. So both I was entering the aging and intergenerational space, but I was also moving into the nonprofit sector, which was totally new for me. And I learned a lot about nonprofit management and leadership. So it was yet another kind of career change. And I've now been at Encore for about 12 years. And I lead a body of work that we call narrative change, which is all about changing the story of the aging of America and this demographic opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about one of your books. So the book that you just mentioned, talks a lot about how to make a living in a difference in the second half of life. What does the second half of life mean, and how should we consider careers at this phase differently than we do at the beginning of our career trajectories?
So I think as I've seen you kind of play at GetSetup, this idea of like defining, like, what do we mean by, it was like always, what do we mean by the Encore stage of life? What do we mean by second acts, third acts? I don't really get so caught up on this. I have found that the book, some like young people in their 30s had picked up the book and like, wow, I really can relate to what's happening here because I'm a career changer and I feel that I'm moving into a new life stage. So we were roughly looking at people kind of alternatively called the 50 plus population, or really looking at kind of the big wave of baby boomers who were kind of hitting 60 in very big numbers. But I'm a Gen Xer, and a lot of my peers are really starting to relate to this kind of life stage of thinking. You get to an age and you start to think about how do I remain relevant? How do I think about reinventing myself for the next chapters of life? How do I kind of find my way in a workplace that is increasingly being shaped by people younger than me, young enough to be my kids or maybe my grandkids?
Yeah, so let's dig into that a little bit. What tips should we consider when approaching a career in the second half of life?
Yeah, I think the main tip is to be curious, and to be a constant learner. And I mean, obviously, anybody who's part of this community is already inherently those things. And I think it's really important to think about what are the different ways we can learn. We can learn obviously through community like this, and the incredible resources you offer here. I think LinkedIn offers a lot of ways to learn. I think higher education is now paying attention to older people and the needs of older people. And we can learn from each other in peer communities like this, and we can learn from younger people.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because I know you had a question for me and for Neil, my co-founder, because we are of significantly different ages, and we think about the same problem differently, but quite complementary.
Mhm.
And so I find that, as I've gotten older, I've become a little more patient and careful. Don't know if that's good or bad, but Neil's really able to sort of counterbalance that with, action and risk and let's do it now. And
Mm.
so I'm the, measure twice, cut once sort of person. And he's already sort of cut 4 times without measuring because he's excited to test.
Yeah.
And so we just make the intergenerational thing work, and we see the best in
Mhm.
sort of the difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's our big passion at Encore right now. So all our work is centered on what we call intergenerational solutions. We're even playing with new language lately. We call that co-generation. So what does it mean when you co-generate something together, and you take kind of the best of what each different generations bring to solving problems. We have a lot of thorny problems in our country right now. And obviously there's a lot of conversation about all the kinds of diversity we need, and we're big believers that age diversity needs to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, I think that we find that there's so much wisdom that we have as part of the GetSetup community and more broadly, that if we can figure out how to tap and how to access and then how to combine, it's just so much more powerful. So, we completely agree. So as the world changes, what are the changes happening in today's sort of working world, if you will, that we need to keep in mind to sort of stay relevant, especially in considering later life careers?
So I think one of the biggest issues that is on everybody's mind right now is this emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think for those of us who have been around for a while, I think that the conversation is shifting a lot. And I think it requires a lot of learning to keep up. And I think young people, first of all, younger generations are far more diverse than older generations in terms of race and ethnicity and culture, and even the way they talk about gender identity and sexual orientation. So there's just, if you want to stay in the world of work and you came of age 20 or 30 years ago in the world of work, the way we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is very different. So I think that's an area where a lot of us are doing deep learning, often alongside our younger colleagues. I think the pandemic really taught us a lot about this idea of how we work and who is essential in our workforce, and how we think about online work versus in-person work versus these hybrid models. So we've been talking a lot, I think, about flexibility at work, and that's always been into the conversation. But just the fact that so many of us worked differently this year, I think that's going to have long lasting impact in terms of the opportunities available to people, especially through virtual work, that didn't exist before. I think, Lawrence, I know you and many on your team are experimenting with working in different locations. Like at Encore, we were always about that because we're a virtual team and we always have been. And we've always been open to people who want to live wherever they want to live. We just care if they can kind of participate in the work that needs to happen. I think many people are open to that. I think another big advantage of virtual is accessibility. And I think lots of people who have various accessibility issues, it's hard for them to travel, or they have various disabilities that might make virtual more appealing. I think we have this ability to be way more inclusive in who can work in different settings and how they can work. So it's one of the upsides that came out of the pandemic, I think.
Well, so you definitely described, some of the pros of working virtually. What do you see as the cons? What do you see as the challenges there?
Yeah. So first of all, it requires a lot of thoughtfulness to be effective virtually, both for an organization setting people up and for individuals who are used to various things about working as a team. It can be very isolating to work on your own virtually. I think just as I talked about, there are some inclusivity and equity issues that come from enabling virtual work. There are also some equity issues that are exposed when people are working virtually, which is some people have comfy offices and lots of space in their home. Other people do not. This was really exposed during the pandemic. We saw it with kids in school and the inequities about, what do people's bedrooms look like, where they're zooming in from, how many rooms are there in a house. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be thinking about.
So one of your big focus areas is on cross-generational connection and collaboration. Talk about why this is relevant and important.
So, we're living in a time where we have potentially 5 generations in the workplace. So if you can't communicate across generational differences and styles, for example, or if you're not used to being, around people of other ages and collaborating, it will start to show. I mean, I think employers are really recognizing that, not in all instances, but there are some generational differences in how we came of age in the workplace affects what feels normal to us and what feels right. Just a simple example, younger people are way more comfortable texting in a business setting than they are often with email. And many baby boomers would never think to text someone that they work with. It would seem like almost an invasion of privacy. Do you have permission to be texting someone? So that's just a really basic example of the kind of generational differences that we see.
I'm sorry about that.
I think that was like an amen. I feel that was good, right?
Yes, probably. Sorry to continue, please.
Oh, I'm just refresh me. You were talking about why the generational matters. Yeah, I think the other big reason, there has always been a generation gap, right? I think the boomers grew up with don't trust anyone over 30. And I think we're seeing a new kind of generational divide right now. I think everybody is familiar or has seen the OK Boomer meme. I think we hear it in the political discourse that there is tension between olders and youngers around a lot of hot button issues. And I don't think we should be ignoring that. I think there are many divides in this country we live in right now. And actually the age divide is maybe one of the most bridgeable divides. We all have older and younger people in our families, for example. We have a natural place. Young people know they will one day get old. I mean, it is there's a commonality there. And not that we shouldn't be trying to bridge all kinds of differences, but this one is one that might be a little easier than some others, and then may help us to bridge some others.
Yeah, those are fabulous points. I mean, we think about those all the time here at GetSetup because we're a multi-generational founding team, but then also our entire staff is we have folks in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. I'm not sure if we have anybody in the 80s, but maybe. Definitely a lot in the 60s and 70s, certainly. Mm-hmm. And we think while there are some sort of communication challenges from time to time, the net effect of having sort of all of those, that different experience and points of view makes us a better company, we think.
Mm.
So thank you for highlighting that. What are good ways, Marci, to connect with younger people to help bridge this divide? What would you sort of counsel our listeners to do if they want to reach out and sort of do a better job at connecting with the younger generation?
I think the easiest thing is to follow your interests. And then get involved in something that furthers those interests. So for example, for me, I'm a writer, and for years, I've been really involved with a nonprofit in New York here called Girls Right Now, spelled WRITE, and it is a intergenerational mentorship program for New York City high school girls. And I served on the board for many years, and I'm now applying to be a mentor in that community. And that community puts me in touch with all of these young women and women identifying people here in New York City. We all share one passion in common, which is writing. So when I go to one of these events, like I'm with my people, like I really feel very comfortable there. And when I meet young women in this community, we immediately have things to talk about. Like we've gone to an event, we see the same thing on stage, or we take a workshop together, and we're side by side in this workshop where we immediately have this way of connecting. So I think it's very hard to just say, oh, I want to meet young people and I'm going to just strike up conversations. So I think I've seen it happen working on political campaigns, or working in a neighborhood soup kitchen, or kind of, so, it happens a lot through volunteering. It could happen through taking a class in person. I met, as I said, when I was becoming a writer, I took all these writing classes, and when I was in my 40s, I met my 30s at the time. I met a lot of people in their early 20s by doing that. And it created this really nice way of like, understanding what is going on for people at a different life stage than me.
So we talked about one of your books, but you have another book. And I love the title, like one person, multiple careers, the original guide to the / career. Awesome title. Tell us a little bit more about that, and what sort of drove you to write that.
Well, as I was looking at trends in work, I was really taken by this fact that there seemed to be more people outside of the kind of moonlighter, or like the Hollywood writer / director, or, the classic actor / waiter in those days. I just found like, wow, lots of everyday people are now like claiming these identities, multiple identities. And I thought it was really interesting. And I was particularly intrigued by people who had like two very divergent kinds of identities. So I wrote an article for the New York Times about two people in particular. One guy was a fashion model and a high school social studies teacher, but like a really famous fashion model. Mm. And the other was a lawyer and a minister. And they just like Superman style, toggled between these different identities and the worlds that those put them in. And when I wrote that piece, lots of people emailed me and like, I have slashes too. And they told me about their various slashes. And that's usually when you're onto something. So I wrote this book, and it definitely caught on. And a lot of people started using that language. And what's fascinating to me is it's never gone away. And it's had a lot of different incarnations. And just in the last couple of months, somebody wrote about these slashies in Hong Kong. And I'd actually lived in Hong Kong, 15 years ago. And it was interesting to me that all these young Hong Kongers were talking about being slashies, which I think is even better language. I used to call people slashes or slashers, which sounded like a horror film. And like they improved on my idea. Right. And I get these Google alerts when anybody is like referring to me and the slash idea. And I just love the way it's evolved. And I think it's evolved now because you can work in so many different ways. You can work across time zones. You could work so much more virtually than people ever have before. But there's also a negative to the slash lifestyle, which is that we don't have job security the way we used to. And the whole employment model is really changing. So I think a lot of people are slashing to create a kind of security that you used to get from a steady job, but it now takes multiple gigs and side hustles to often survive. So that is the downside to it. It's not always by choice.
Yeah, I've noticed that if you look at somebody's LinkedIn profile, often you will see folks use slashes to really describe sort of what it is they do or the different things they do, sort of, investor, advisor, mentor,
Yes.
author. And it's really quite interesting as we think about your book. And then, look at LinkedIn as a really great example of the different people who use slashes.
So, Lawrence, when I wrote that book, you couldn't do that on LinkedIn. And that's an adaptation that LinkedIn made. You now can list many. You used to have to choose a title. And I think they even use a vertical line. And I love the vertical line to do that. And I think I see other people really claiming identities that may not even be work. Like there are people who feel that parenting should be recognized or caregiving should be recognized in those kinds of identities. These are occupations that are often unpaid, but take up quite a lot of our time. And I think as you move through life, these are ways to describe yourself. I think people do the same with activism and cause related work.
Yeah, very interesting. When you think about different innovations in the marketplace, like what do you see happening these days that's helping address these generational gaps?
I see a lot. So one of the things we do at Encore is we support social innovators and people with big ideas who want to get those ideas and projects out in the world. So we have we have an innovation fellowship and a public voices fellowship. So some of our fellows are doing some of that innovating. So a model I love is called Circle, Cirkel. And Circle, are you familiar with Charlotte Japp and Circle, Lawrence?
I am.
Yeah, so Charlotte is a young anti-ageism activist, and what drove her is she was in her 20s and she was trying to find mentors at work, and she worked in media and tech, and she couldn't find anyone over 40 to get advice from where she worked. So like many millennials, she was living at home with her baby boomer parents who were both downsized in their 50s and were now self-employed entrepreneurs. And over breakfast every morning, she would ask them advice, like, how do I deal with this uncomfortable situation at work? How do I ask for a promotion? All these kinds of things that her parents had lived through. And they gave her great advice. And her parents were asking her advice too, like, how do I build a website? Or how do I get on Instagram? So they were starting to have this really cross-generational mentoring thing going on. And she decided to build a community that was all about that. And people who join that community get matched with older and younger people, and you could be very specific about what you want to work on. So that's one model I really like. I've seen several other models that are really combating social isolation and loneliness, and which we know is a really serious issue. And two populations that suffer the most from social isolation and loneliness are older people and younger people. Specifically students. The younger population has the highest suicide rate of any generation. And so we've seen a lot of younger innovators creating these virtual connection sites and platforms where people can get to know someone of another generation and develop different kinds of relationships that have to do with, at the end of the day, getting to know people. One is called Big and Mini, which was started by two University of Texas undergrads in the middle of the pandemic to connect people. And it was inspired, as many of these initiatives are, by young people's missing their grandparents and thinking in the pandemic of what that learning relationship is about and why it's so integral.
Yeah, those are wonderful businesses that you mentioned. If you were to try and predict What might be the next trends for older adults who are looking to stay relevant and motivated in the workplace? What would come to mind?
Well, one is already happening that I do want to say, which is I think higher education is paying a lot of attention to older people. And in the Encore movement, we know of, I don't know, at least a dozen universities that have started Encore programs where people coming back to campus to work on their next act can learn alongside others in that kind of transition, but also learn alongside younger people who are getting their education at the same time. And then there are innovations like the Modern Elder Academy, which was started by Chip Conley.
Yes.
And, you know, it started as a physical destination in Baja, Mexico, where I've had the honor of being on the faculty, and what a treat to have to go to Mexico to teach. And that's really, he calls it the first midlife wisdom school. We have no rite of passages for what happens when you hit kind of midlife, and Modern Elder Academy is aiming to figure that out, but they've really opened their model. And in the pandemic, they went virtual, and you can now go through their program virtually. I think we're going to just see more and more blossoming in that space, and there will be a lot of competition in that market.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, we are seeing some positive trends, and we at GetSetup, we try to be part of that, because I think that, you know, anything that we can do to help connect people, promote sort of socialization, promote sort of learning together in groups, I think is part of the positive trend that we want to encourage. But there's so many great businesses out there that are starting to think about the benefits of different generations coming together to create a better product, a better service, or a better experience. So where can we go, Marci, if we want to find more resources on staying relevant and fostering cross-generational connection?
Well, I would start with the encore.org website, but really, I would start coming to our events also. So if you sign up for our newsletter, and we have a really big event happening on June 23rd, we just sent out an email about it. It's not even posted on our website yet, but if you join our email list or follow us on social media, you'll hear all about it. It's called Co-Generate. It's a 2-hour public event to really spur people to think about this idea of coming together across generations. So we're pretty excited about that. And, you know, I think exploring things like MEA, Circle for sure are good ways, but we are constantly sharing resources. And if you go to the Gen to Gen section of our website, you'll get many ideas.
Great, and we'll include some links that people can get both in the chat and after the class. And I just remind folks, if there are questions that you have for Marci, please just drop them into chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. I will take the first one from Leslie. Marci, how do you suggest we join or start cross-generational connection and collaboration in our own local communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could, you know, it depends on if you want to be starting from scratch, or you want to kind of take a model that already exists and see if you can build on it. So I would actually look to your personal interests. Like, are you interested in being a mentor? Are you interested in working on a social change project where you'll be working side by side with younger people? And I also think when it comes to intergenerational collaboration, there's a real question of what age are you thinking about? Like, are you thinking about students? If so, are you thinking about high school? Are you thinking about college? Are you thinking about people at a different stage of work than you? So I've always done a lot of work with younger people in the workplace, where I feel like it really keeps me on my toes, and I'm really interested in forming relationships with younger people. So I always find that cross-mentoring people is a really nice arrangement. Like what you were talking about, Lawrence, like what you, Neil, have is a natural way to do it. And if you are ever in a position where you could be hiring, I would encourage you to think about hiring for anything, like maybe you're working on a volunteer project in your community, maybe you're putting together something. I live in an apartment building, so I always think about, like, if we're working on a project, how might I put out a request for people who want to work on this thing, and actually add the issue and say, I'd love this to be an age diverse. I'd like this group to be diverse in every ways, including in it by age.
And what do you, and Marci, what do you think would be some interesting examples for our learners of places to get started to go and do this? So like if you were to get really tactical about it, folks that live, in suburban locations or rural locations that are now able to sort of get out of the house, what could they do? Where could they go to take that first step?
So I would say two things. If you're part of a faith community, that's a natural place to go. They are, by definition, intergenerational spaces. And then I would again go to, like, any interest you have and plug in there and think, do I want to be involved in arts? Do I want to be involved in, feeding the hungry in my neighborhood? Do I, whatever your passion is. All neighborhoods have community centers, and often they're segregated by age, right? So we have senior centers, and then we have early childhood centers. So what if you went to one or the other and said, well, what would it be like if we brought a group of people who are either older or younger into that setting? And that's something many organizations, community centers, are starting to think like that. So it wouldn't be completely foreign. If you are involved, if you live near a university, universities are often quite intergenerational places. And I would aim to see if there are efforts you can get involved in that where the university is already connecting to the community, and start there. So, are there some programs that are open to community members that interest you?
And so question from Lisa is, what would be the corporate or company equivalent of that if we have folks who are working in different work environments? How might they go and encourage cross-generational sort of interaction?
That's a really great question. I would talk to, I would again start with, what are you interested in? The idea of just bringing older and younger people together without any sense of what they're going to do is like, I think it's not just the idea of bringing older and younger people together, but trying to figure out a common cause for the older and younger people to work on together. So again, I would look at anything you want to be involved with at work. Do you want to be involved in DEI? Do you want to be involved in corporate volunteering? Do you want to, what is the thing that's interesting to you? Find the person who's running it, get involved, and then say, how can we make some explicit intergenerational strategy part of the way we do this work? So how can we make sure to invite older and our oldest and our youngest employees into this effort with some intentional outreach and in the kinds of media that they respond to, for example. So I think there's never one answer, because I keep going back to, go to your own interests, go to what you want to work on anyway, and then think about the intergenerational opportunity in that area.
So as we think about sort of the work environment, obviously our demographic, my demographic, thinks about workplace sensitivity as it pertains to sort of different generations and the style of communication. And so one of the subjects that I think is near and dear to our hearts is, a lot of us are thinking about additional work, an additional gig, making some supplemental income, but we might be talking to or interviewing with or communicating with potentially a younger workforce or a younger hiring manager. What advice, that's a big topic, but what advice
That's a big topic.
you provide there?
Yeah. So this is why it is kind of handy to have younger friends. I mean, literally, I was just with a younger friend today on text, and she used a word that I had never heard before. She said to me, I recently let my hair grow silver in the pandemic. Lawrence, it seems like you might have done the same thing.
I did.
And she wrote to me and she said, "Your hair is so giving." And I'm like, I have no idea what this word meant. And she's in her 20s. And I wrote back to her right away. And I'm like, I don't know what that word means. So she pulled up the Urban Dictionary and sent me the definition. And then she sent me an audio message, which I find that younger people are using a little more. That people my age send voicemails, but she uses the audio feature of text all the time. And she left me this beautiful message of how it would sound if she had the intonation. And then I immediately knew, okay, this is a positive, not a negative. My hair looks so giving. So anyway, I think one thing I would say is make sure you're regularly talking to younger people in your life, and you will just learn some interesting things about what's going on with younger people. I think it's pretty important to make sure that you convey that you have energy, that you're interested in learning, especially around new technology. There are stereotypes out there that older people are not interested in learning technology. So it's unfounded. Older people do just fine learning new technology, and many of us have continued to do it throughout our lives. But that is a persistent stereotype that's hanging around there. So I think it's important to do your homework and see when you're talking to a potential employer, what are they using? What are they using to communicate? What are they using? What social media platforms do they use? Are you familiar with those platforms? Are you looking at what they put out there? And if you happen to be talking to someone younger when you interview, I think treat it like you would have treated any other interview. Do a little research on the person, look at their LinkedIn profile, maybe look at their social media if it's public, and see what you could learn about the person, see if you have any common interests. But there's nothing that, particular that I would say is going to come up in every interview with a younger person. It's always about, are you enthusiastic about the position, and are you qualified for the position? And if there's some area where you feel like it might be a stretch, can you convey that you're willing to learn?
Yeah, Marci, you touched on some really interesting points, because you mentioned LinkedIn and you mentioned social media, which reminds me, it must be very different to look for a job today versus 20 years ago, right? Because, 20 years ago, we were probably, taking our paper resume and completely updating it and applying in a certain manner. And now it's almost impossible to get a job without having a LinkedIn profile that's completely built out, because it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the place that employers probably look first before they even accept a meeting with you.
So it's where I look if I'm hiring people. And I think a lot of people rely on it, particularly for kind of jobs that I would say are, in the office or kind of virtual setting. I do think it may be less common in some other fields. So I'm not sure it's universal. Paper resumes, not paper, but digital resumes are still required. People still ask for them. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing I wanted to mention is, when you're interviewing with a younger person, is to avoid talking about things that you accomplished many years ago. I think that, that expression, "What have you done for me lately?" It's really on my mind when you're thinking about, in any interview context, it's really important to think about, what have you done recently that is relevant to the position at hand? And that's why it's so important to be volunteering and to work on community projects and to be active in places that may not even be a job, because the place you may have gotten the experience may not be at a job. It may be in some other corner of your life, and that's fine.
So as we think about sort of intergenerational relationships, how would you think about, if you have grandparents grandchildren, like obviously there's family dynamics that can allow you to sort of help maintain and foster and stay up to speed on sort of intergenerational communication. What would you suggest or tell us there?
Well, two things. If you're lucky to have family and older and younger people in your life of many just generations, I think it's important to take signals from them sometimes. So don't always say like, let's default to the way I like to communicate, but try to ask them the way they would like to communicate. Like I have my nephew, would never respond to my emails. He would never respond to text. But when I noticed he was on Instagram and I started sending him messages on Instagram, suddenly he wrote back to me. And I was like, well, that was intriguing. And then suddenly we had this channel that we were using together. So I think following cues like that is interesting. It's not always about technology and communications, but that is one piece of it. But I also think family members could be a great window into practicing and getting to know people of other generations, because you will meet the friends of your various family members. And those are the people who often are going to be helping you find the next opportunity, just as it is with peers. So I always say that LinkedIn, it's really important to kind of younger people, when they're entering the workplace, they often like raid their parents' LinkedIn. And I think parents need to do that with their children or their grandchildren too. See, like, who do your kids know on LinkedIn? Because sometimes those might be the best introduction to someone.
Yeah, I mean, those are really great points, because oftentimes, we deal with intergenerational issues just in our own families, and that can be a great place to sort of learn, improve, and reach out and do a better job there.
Mm-hmm.
How would you reach out to someone if you thought you could help mentor them, but the suggestion of even proposing that, could that offend them? How would you approach that?
Wow, that's a tough one. I have to be honest. I believe that not everyone is seeking a mentor, and it's usually a thing that involves a lot of chemistry. So, I mean, if you're in touch with a person, you could easily start a conversation and say, wow, I love the work you're doing. I'm passionate about that area too. Perhaps I'd love to talk to you about your work and where you're going. I wouldn't kind of zoom right into the mentor role, but it almost sounds like you were talking about someone you may be watching from afar. So if you're finding yourself in that position, I think you could do an offer of help, and you could just say, wow, I love and admire what you're doing. And I'd love to be part of your success. Would you be open to a volunteer or hearing some of my ideas, and then see if a mentorship kind of evolves?
Yeah, I've had some experience where people tell me that they want to mentor someone else, but when they propose it, that other person takes offense because it's a suggestion that they need help when it wasn't in fact requested or desired, right? Which is why I asked that question.
Yeah. I think it's be careful. You have to tread carefully there.
Question from Margaret. What are the kinds of activities that you think help sort of that mentor relationship thrive? Like, where is that sort of most appropriate?
So there are two ways that I've seen mentor relationships thrive. One is through actual mentoring programs where and mentor.org is a great organization to find lots of opportunities to mentor. And they work with organizations who have really good models for matching people, like in Big Brothers Big Sisters, or these very established organizations that have a lot of experience in knowing how to match people and then providing support to the mentors into how to be a good mentor. The other is these organic mentorships that arise when you kind of encounter someone and there's some chemistry. And then it organically develops into kind of getting to know someone, seeing where they're struggling, seeing how you can be helpful. And I will say all all the best mentorships seem to go both ways and involve kind of learning across generations, except if you're dealing with maybe perhaps very, very young people. But especially when they involve workplaces, I think it's really dated to be thinking about a mentor as that the older person is always dispensing the wisdom and the younger person is always receiving. So I think it's really important to come with that sense of humility. And the other thing I would say is like, go easy on the advice. Often the best mentors are just really good listeners. Kind of like a shrink, right? Who let the person come to their own decisions about themselves. So I think nobody wants a know-it-all, even if they're seeking a mentor.
So Doris is asking, what is the most impactful thing you've learned from a younger mentor?
Wow. Well, this one is a really important one. I have learned that younger people want relationships with older people, and that makes me feel great. So I don't have kids, and it's a big issue in my life. I spent a lot of my 40s really kind of coming to terms with that, and I'm not alone. There are a lot of people, increasingly large numbers of people who will age without kids of their own. So I've been really intentional about forming relationships with younger people, and they are very important, something I really prize and prioritize in my life. And nothing makes me feel better than when I see a younger person really appreciate that I am different from the peers that are in their life, and that I am bringing something different, that we can still have stuff in common and we can still like enjoy activities together. But I do appreciate that I bring something different. It's just made me feel very valued. And and young people taught me that.
So Michelle has a follow-up question. Have you had an experience having a mentor that is younger than you, or seen that, and how has that worked?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I talked about Charlotte Chapin's circle because Charlotte and I are cross mentors. I've been advising her company, but she's actually been advising me on all kinds of things. And I go to her a lot. I go to her for social media help. Like, for example, I'm active on social media, so that's why I give that example a lot. But I think generationally, people use it very differently. And I was trying to understand when I got onto Instagram, like I couldn't figure out like if I should behave on Instagram differently than I behave on Twitter or Facebook. Like, and there were a lot of different norms, especially on what people shared and how. So she's really, this is just has nothing to do with age, but she knows quite a lot about branding and design. And I'm really interested in those two things. So I go to her all the time for her opinion on those kind of matters. Yeah, she's a really good example. And we both share a mentor that's older than us. I've given her one of my older mentors. So one of my older mentors is Ruth Wooden, who was the chair of the Encore board for many years. And when I came into the Encore world and the nonprofit world, Ruth really taught me a lot about nonprofit leadership and management. She's a veteran nonprofit leader, and she's served on countless boards. And I introduced her to Charlotte, and now Charlotte has like, these two different, older mentors. So this like sharing of mentors is another thing I really like.
And so you mentioned the social media tools, and obviously we could do another session just on that. But if we were to pick one, let's pick LinkedIn, for example. How would you recommend to our audience today, should they definitely have a LinkedIn profile, or when should they, and how should they think about using a tool like that?
Yeah, I think if you're not looking for work or engaging in the world of work in some way, or actively looking for a volunteer assignment, I'm not sure you need to be on LinkedIn. So I think those are the main reasons to be on LinkedIn. It's a place to keep up with industry news and trends. It's a place to connect and look for other people who work on issues you care about, who are, who are employers are all on there. It's a combination of like the yellow pages, the white pages, a place to post your resume. There are just many things going on there. And actually, in terms of generational differences, I think it is one platform where people behave kind of similarly, regardless of their age. It is also quite less toxic than other social media platforms, which often go, have, political dissent and trolling and things like that don't happen as much on LinkedIn. And I do include it in the social media universe because it is itself a social media platform in that people share news, they share announcements about their life, but they tend to share ones that are in the professional or kind of issue area frame, rather than some people do share milestones in their personal life, but a lot less than they might on other social platforms.
Thank you. Very helpful. Maybe on a separate session, we'll dig into Facebook and Twitter and some of the more complicated ones. Let's take one more question. We'll take one from Betty. You speak a lot about women mentors, both older and younger. How is it to mentor someone of the opposite sex? And what are
that is such a good talk. Okay, so I've had those too. I think obviously in the world of, kind of everybody's been very aware of sexual harassment and kind of inappropriate behavior. Obviously, you have to be mindful of both those issues, but those issues obviously can arrive in same gender relationships as well. I've had many male mentors and mentees and cross-generational friendships. One of the ones that I'm most connected to and proud of is that I had a young personal trainer for many years. He was finishing college and I was in my 40s, and he had this way, he got to know all of his clients who were all in their 40s, and we all became mentors to him. And we were like this collective group of helping to shape his career. He's now a cop and he lives in another state, and we're very, very close friends. He still thinks of me as kind of like an aunt figure. I'm the same age as his mother, and we got to know each other's families. And I think if you have appropriate, boundaries and you're mindful, I really don't think there's any issue of crossing gender lines in mentor relationships. I think that should happen as commonly as same gender relationships.
Great. Thank you for asking that one. That is a very, very good question. We're getting close to the top of the hour. So we're nearing the end of our time together, and we'll start wrapping things up here shortly. One of the things that we wanted to do before we finish is to take a group photo of Marci with all of our attendees. So if you're willing to be in our group photo, make sure your camera's turned on. And if we could ask our photographer just to jump in and help us take a quick photo, that'd be fun. So turn your, if your camera's not on, turn it on if you'd like. You do not have to if you don't want to, but we always think it's fun to take a group photo. Liz, can you just let us know when you're done?
Yep. All right. Everyone get their smiles on here. 1, 2, 3. All right. Taken.
Thank you, Liz. Marci, we want a huge thank you. It's been wonderful having you here today and learning about bridging the generational divide.
What a treat, Lawrence. I love your community, and I'm sure I'll be showing up in other ways, taking your classes, spreading the word as always.
Oh, and we so appreciate you being a big fan and cheerleader. Thank you so much. And everybody, check out the encore.org website at www.encore.org, just like it sounds, and sign up for their email list to learn more about their upcoming events and opportunities. And don't forget to follow Encore on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And please check out Marci's book, the Encore Career Handbook. We'll include a link in the follow-up notes so that you can read more of Marci's awesome writing. We'll also share other helpful links. Thank you to our audience here in the front row today and on in our live stream communities. If you'd like to get a recording of this event, please email our support team at help@getsetup.io. And if you're new to Get Set Up, we hope you've gotten a taste of what we do. We have over 400 online classes weekly, all designed for older adults, taught by older adults like me. The classes are free as we work with local governments, community, and healthcare organizations who support their members by subsidizing the cost of these classes. And I want to draw attention to the relevant classes on Get Set Up. So if you like this event, you'll find other classes like this or other sessions like this that you can join. So look for the link to sign up for these classes in the chat here in Zoom, and we'll send it as part of the follow-up notes. And everyone who registered will receive an email after the event with follow-up links and notes and whatnot. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing all of you in a future class. Thank you again, Marci, and have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.